You know, we all think that life will get better some way. The way that we usually think that life is going to get better, if other things will change. You know, life will get better when my spouse changes. Life will get better when my boss changes. Life will get better when my kids finally change. Life will get better when my salary is what I think it should be. But as the saying goes, wherever you go, there you are. In other words, if something outside of you changes, things will stay essentially the same. It's what I call the whack-a-mole rule of reality. I've told some of you this before, but it bears repeating. It's the carnival game, you know, where you have a mallet and you stand in front of a box with a mallet and there's a bunch of holes in the top of the box, and at random a mole pops out of one hole and you try to smash it, whack it. And then another one pops up and you try to whack that one. And if you can whack them all as they pop up in these random times in a certain limited time period, you get a prize. It's the same in life. When you finally get rid of that irritating person or the person that you're anxious about or afraid of, the mole in your life, another one pops up to take his or her place. The prize is inner peace. But we never get it because we spend our lives whack-a-moling those people, trying to get rid of them, or perhaps we try to run away from them. But the truth is, there are always so many people around that irritate us or make us anxious that as soon as we get rid of the one that we've been focusing on, another one appears. The truth of this is that the problem isn't them, it's us. Our irritation and whacking is part of us that is trying to protect us from something, from some sense of helplessness or fear or judgment or wounding. And when we were little, I'm sure that that part that came forward was helpful when we were younger, but we don't live in the world of childhood any longer. The Spirit is calling us to our deeper self because we are the ones that have to change, and we call it spiritual transformation or salvation. The Jews call it shalom. The Buddhists call it enlightenment. The point is, it has to do with you and me being transformed. Spiritual transformation is possible if you first recognize that parts of your identity are frozen in the past. And they're frozen to protect you from experiences which you had then, but in the present, you don't really need to fear. Let's take Saul as an example from our text today. A brilliant young man, had a fiery part of himself that totally identified with the Jewish law. He was born in Tarsus, a cosmopolitan Greco-Roman city, and his family had enough money to send him to Jerusalem to be educated in Jewish law at the highest levels by the most famous teacher of the day, Gamaliel. There were others who had been so educated, but they did not have the anger that Saul had. They did not hold the coats of those who were stoning the apostle Stephen as Saul did. They did not become vigilante terrorists, leading covert operations to uncover Jesus' followers, have them beaten and thrown into jail, and sometimes killed. No, the others followed the advice of their revered teacher Gamaliel, who said, if the people of the way, and those are people that follow Jesus, if the people of the way are of God, then they will flourish. But if not, they will die. so just let them be. But Saul defied him and persecuted Jesus' followers. Where did this fiery, angry part come from that was so certain in his heart? Oh, we don't know. What we know is that it was protecting an other part of him that was wounded earlier in life. This kind of anger, our anger and our rage, doesn't just come out of nowhere. Our tendency to fall away and to hide from any kind of conflict doesn't come out of nowhere. It's a part of our lives. It has grown out of our lives. Maybe Saul's parents motivated him with humiliation and unreachable goals. Or maybe he was a brilliant nerd in his early education and was ridiculed by other kids. Or maybe he stepped over some line hoping to do good and a Roman soldier beat him up for it. We don't know. What we do know is that it came from somewhere, and a part of him raised up in response to it. Accepting psychopaths and sociopaths who have something seriously wrong with their brains, people don't generally resort to beatings and murder. It's the same with you and me. Our whack-a-mole moments do not just appear out of nowhere. They are part of us that is developed through a difficult experience or series of such experiences in our lives. And there is another part in us who doesn't want to whack-a-mole but run away in an attempt to eliminate the problem. We're trying to change others while leaving ourselves unchanged. And in this way, we try to control the world instead of seeking spiritual transformation. Saul feared that his identity could not tolerate the success of the followers of Jesus, so he had to eliminate them. Saul thought that this critical, angry part of himself was his whole self, until that day on the road to Damascus when he got knocked off the horse and was blinded, and he heard a voice. Then he realized that he had this frozen part of him, and that's the first step in spiritual transformation, to recognize that you've got some parts that are frozen. The second step is to discover that your fear no longer makes sense. I mean, Saul discovers that the one he's persecuting, Jesus, does not return anger for anger. Rather, Jesus, the one who has knocked him off of his horse and blinded him in this mystical spiritual experience, says, "Why are you persecuting me? Why are you afraid of me?" And there, somehow, in those moments, Saul realizes that he does not need to be afraid. I mean, if you'd been persecuting someone, if you'd been killing members of a follower and suddenly they showed up, you'd think perhaps they might take your head off. But he doesn't do that. And so the world takes on a new framework for Saul. I can remember early in our marriage packing the car to go to Sally's parents for Christmas one year. It's before we had kids. And time was short, and there were a lot of things to pack. And, of course, Sally kept bringing me more things to pack. And we weren't getting out of the driveway on time. And I got a little upset about time. And, I know this would be hard for you to believe, but I got a bit upset and gave off a string of sentences that included some expletives. And I threw them in the general direction of Sally. And she just stood there, silent. I stood there silent. And she stood there silent a little longer and looked at me. And I stood there silent. And finally she said, "Well, Merry Christmas to you too." And then she turned around and walked away. And there I was, left, wondering, where did that come from? Why am I such an idiot? What part of me just jumped out and did this stupid thing? And then I stepped into that thought a little bit because, of course, she didn't want to come out and talk to me. She just wanted me to pack the car. So there I was, left to myself. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, I know. You know, you always get nervous when you go to your in-laws because you think they're judging you. Of course, they probably weren't judging me at all. There'd been times that they might have looks on their faces, and I interpreted those looks to be like they were judging me. But matter of fact, it just could have been, gas pain. Who knows? I'm making this interpretation, and then, I could have felt myself judged several times in an evening just because we'd had beans and hot dogs for supper. It was ridiculous. And I'm going, oh, yeah, that's right. You've got this thing. And it goes back further than that. You are afraid that you'll be judged. I know it's not as dramatic a transformation as the Apostle Paul, but that was a spiritual transformation for me. You see, it expanded my sense of self. It included others. Recognize the frozen parts, but then discover that your fear no longer makes any sense. Your fear in the present moment no longer makes any sense. And then spiritual transformation leads you to identify with those who earlier irritated you or you were afraid of. This is a big step. Blind Saul is taken to Damascus where he was going to persecute Jesus' followers. There's this great sentence in the text. It said that they led him to Damascus because his eyes were open but he couldn't see anything. I love that sentence because that's the way it is with most of us. Our eyes are open and we think, oh boy, I can see everything. But in fact, we can't see everything because there are parts of ourselves that are actually blinding us like they were with me. So here he is. He lives with these people who he had been persecuting. And he discovers that they are not bent on breaking God's law, but upon spreading God's love. He discovers that ultimately they desire the same thing he does. That like him, they want to be people who have faith in God's creation. They want to be people who live in hope. They want to love and to be loved. They want to be part of a community in which they can express their joy and sorrow. And this whole entire experience transforms Saul into Paul. And he discovers that the part of himself that had feared differences and judgment and the unknown, that critical part that lashed out to save the world by violence and hatred, became the part that went on to save the world with love. Later he writes in Corinthians, faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. What a transformation. This guy that was a killer terrorist is now saying that the greatest thing is love. He was spiritually transformed. So recognize your frozen parts. Discover your fears no longer make any sense. And identify with those with whom you used to fear. Why do we have Bible studies on parables, as we did in Lent? Workshops on the discernment of God's Spirit in our lives. Sermons that challenge our hardened boundaries. To give us more knowledge so that we can speak to others in knowing tones? No. So that we can recognize the parts of our identity that have frozen to protect us. Why do we have weekends of the healing arts with a labyrinth and Reiki? Why do we have services of anointing people with oil? Why do we celebrate communion? Why do we have groups like the Artist's Way and our men's group and our storytelling group? To give people with busy schedules something else to do? No. to give people an opportunity to discover deep in their hearts that our fears no longer make any sense and that we are loved beyond our knowing. And why are we having a poetry reading on Why Words Matter, sponsored by our Compassionate Conversations on Race? To make white people feel guilty? No. So that we can identify with those who are different than we are and expand our spirit. Why do we send people on mission trips to different subcultures? Mexico, Hartford, Mississippi, Lakota Reservation, Appalachia? So that we can check the service box and see ourselves as do-gooders? No. So that we can identify with those who are different than we are and expand our spirit. Why are we having a giveaway Sunday in which we won't worship here in the sanctuary, but we'll be in the community serving others? So that we can do some new thing and show how different we are from other churches? No. So that we can identify with those whom we don't usually identify and thus expand our spirit. Why does South Church even exist at all? We are not a faith-based social service agency to change the world, nor are we here to simply help people adapt to our self-absorbed ladder-climbing culture. We are here for transformation. We are a community that exists for the purpose of spiritual transformation. We are a community that exists for the purpose of spiritual transformation. That is the one and only process that leads to peace, to justice, and compassion. And had it not happened to the Apostle Paul, we might have known him as the Hitler of the first century, who'd gone on killing all of these followers of Jesus. But he was transformed. And what happened? He flits around the Mediterranean. He starts these little communities, these little churches where people are coming together in ways that they've never come together before. And then he writes them letters, and those letters are in that book right there. And my goodness, his transformation brought love, happiness, and joy, not only to others, but to him as well. Ah, might it be the same for you and for me? Because, of course, Christmas comes every year.